Good morning. Welcome to another segment of Lifting Your Spirit, a show in which we monthly interview people about their spiritual lives and their work in supporting others on their spiritual journey. I'm Reverend Joel Grossman, Interfaith Minister, Director of Spiritual Services for Constellation Hospice, based here in Newburyport, and offer spiritual coaching on a virtual basis and donation basis.
And I'm Ted Jones, a centering prayer group facilitator at Closer Than Breath, an online contemplative community rooted in the Christian mystical tradition.
Our show is based on 4 principles, the first one being that everyone is spiritual. Sometimes we're active and conscious in our spiritual life, sometimes not. But even when we're not, we still have a spirit.
And second, that there are many ways to lift your spirit, not only through formal religious or spiritual practices, but also through nature, art, music, and service to others, just to name a few.
And third, each person's spiritual path is unique and may change in small or large ways over time.
And fourth, that it's important to respect your own spiritual journey, trusting that one step will naturally lead to the next, and also to respect the uniqueness of everyone else's spiritual journey, regardless of how different they may be from your own. We're not here to promote or convince you of any particular method or practice, but just to offer some food for thought.
And I'm pleased to welcome Cathy Grigsby, Reverend Cathy Grigsby, to the show today, who will offer some good food for thought. She is a graduate of the Interfaith Theological Seminary in Arizona. She was, when I met her through a small group of interfaith ministers in New England, and out of that grew Chaplaincy Institute of Maine, known as CHIME, which she has been a core faculty member of for 20 plus years. She is an artist and a school art teacher, and she is one of the co-founders of the Interfaith Ministers of New England, a reformation of that group. So thank you very much for being with us today, Cathy, and we'd like to hear from you about your spiritual journey through your life.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm a little nervous, so I would like to start with a moment of silence, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, when I think about my spiritual journey, I guess I go way back to my childhood and to 3 particular, I want to call them events. They were, things that, 2 of them were just memories, but those first 2 memories when I was about 2 and about 4 or 5 had a quality to them that now I would call mystical, but at the time, of course, I had no words. One of them was an out-of-body experience. Anyway, these 2 experiences were like of a different quality. than all of my other memories. Like, it would be like if everything else was in black and white and these were in color. So they stayed with me in a way that was, I guess when I look back on it, it was motivating, but it was motivating maybe for I don't know, in a different way. Part of it was, am I crazy? You know, I never heard of anybody having experiences like that, and yet they were profoundly memorable and moving for me, even though I didn't understand them. So that was the first two things. The third thing was when I was 7, my family moved to Maracaibo, Venezuela for 3 years, which was a fantastic experience for me. But I think, looking back on it, one of the things there were two things actually that struck me. One is that I was exposed to a level of extreme poverty that didn't happen in Indiana, where I grew up. So we went to an American school. All the kids we were with were, you know, children of oil company people, so people of means. And yet we were surrounded in this place with, you know, this poverty, which nobody ever, like, talked about, or, you know, there was no explanation to me of, you know, why we were so privileged, and, you know, these people clearly were not. So that, I guess, you know, at the time, I couldn't process it really, because I was a child and I had no power, but when I look back on it, I realized that there was something that stayed with me from that, some deep-seated need to understand a crazy world, because it didn't really make sense to me why we had all this privilege and other people didn't. So anyway, when I look at my childhood, those three things sort of stand out for me as, okay, taking me somewhere, taking me on, you know, the beginning of the journey, I guess. I mean, I also grew up in a Protestant religion. My parents were very religious. We went to church every Sunday. But I think about age 11, I started asking lots of questions, which wasn't, you know, that people didn't really receive very well. I remember having a lot of arguments with my mother, you know, like I would say things like, well, hell doesn't make any sense to me. I don't really believe, you know, so things like that were not, people didn't want to talk to me about stuff like that, you know, including the church and my parents. So anyway, I kind of just rejected the whole thing. Forget about that. You know, I thought Jesus was great, but it didn't look to me like anybody was living what he was teaching. So anyway, I went on a quest, if you want to call it that way. As soon as I left home, I was, you know, in college, and it was 1970, so lots of stuff was happening. I was in Bloomington, Indiana University. You could find pretty much anything in Bloomington, Indiana at that time. So I studied Eastern religions. I went to yoga teachers and other more Eastern type teachers. What else? I got involved in lots of Edgar Cayce and sort of psychic kinds of things. Anyway, I was searching. And trying to compress a bunch of years here. Anyway, so at some point in Bloomington, I had a friend who was, the two of us were looking into lots of different kinds of spiritual things and reading a lot of books, and And she called me up one day and said, there's this spiritual teacher in town, and her name is Beverly Lanzetta. And at the moment I heard that name on the phone, something really deep in me said, yes. And I'd never really felt anything like that before. No, I'd never had any, I was full of a lot of doubts and questions. I mean, that was that was what I was doing. I was a rebel. And
So you only knew her name, you knew nothing about her? Or?
I knew nothing about, I knew she was a spiritual teacher. That's all I knew.
Huh.
And it was like, sign me up. I called her right away, and I signed up for pretty much everything she was offering, which was, individual sessions, and then she was teaching classes. And
this was before you had any contact with her, just from the name?
The name, yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was like I say, unlike anything I ever experienced. But there was some kind of recognition in me that was just so deep that I can't explain it. Anyway, so like those experiences that I had when I was a child, she was able to explain them to me in a way that just was like made total sense to me. Like, oh, only no one had ever talked to me like that before. It's like, it was kind of like, oh, well, I know that, but no, I didn't really know that, and I didn't have language for any of it. So
could you say anything about those early 2-year-old, 4-year-old experiences?
I did. I asked her about them.
And could you share with us any particulars about those experiences?
Well, the second one, I was lying on in my parents' bedroom, which was kind of scary. It had this sort of scary wallpaper. Both experiences happened in my parents' bedroom, interestingly enough. Anyway, I was crying. They had taken away my blankie. Was apparently a seismic event. And the next thing I knew, I was up on the ceiling looking down at my body. Not with really no emotion, just kind of like, yeah, there it is, And then immediately after that, I was back in my body, and there were these voices like right here beside me. Not like real words, but these voices were speaking, and I was afraid because I couldn't understand them, but I also kind of felt like I should. There was something familiar about them, and I felt like I should be able to understand it. So basically, her explanation was that at that point, something about that I had decided to just leave. Goodbye. I don't want to be here anymore. Nobody gets me here, and that the voices were calling me back, sort of telling me that, sorry, but no, you have something you need to be doing, right? So anyway, that it helped me to feel like, okay, well, maybe I'm not crazy, because that was always my bellwether, is like, well, why is this stuff happening to me, and why is nobody talking about anything like that, and am I crazy? So anyway, so I worked with Beverly for the next 2 years very intensely, doing, she didn't, at that point, their interfaith wasn't a thing. Her teachings came out of a deeply mystical experience that she had, and her words were not the same as they are now, because she went on and studied religion at Fordham University, and and sort of delved into religion in the world and in history. So it has changed a lot, but in those days, I mean, something about it never changed because it was always about the spiritual journey being a journey of, first of all, you know, what's inside of you. What are you? What is keeping you from being able to be the you know, the sacred being that you are? And, you know, of course, there's a lot of stuff and it's all different for everybody. But for me, that became my whole focus in life, really, is, okay, I'm going to dig in there and what is it? I'm going to look at everything and I'm going to hopefully, you know, heal. I mean, you know, part of the healing, of course, was directly with Beverly, but it was also directly with whatever you call God, right? So,
Beverly, I did look at her website when because I was curious. I was struck by learning that she went to Fordham, because that's a Catholic, very Catholic university. She references Merton on her website, I believe, and I'm wondering about sort of how those influences played out for her, and what other kind of focuses have in religion have really shaped her message, which has clearly something that you've been exposed to over all these years, and how that's kind of flowed together for you.
yeah, that's a good question, because I've been working with her for 48 years now.
Wow.
So I have the sort of like my formation in I don't know, Beverly world. I mean, I don't know. It didn't really have, you know, a name back then. And so my formation went from this sort of I don't want to say amorphous, because it was not amorphous at all, but the language was very different, and very much centered on sort of looking at the different kinds of energies of the body, and the way that we get stuck in particular thought processes, and different ways of healing, different healing techniques, all of those kinds of things. So then when I came, so there was a period of time where I didn't know where she was, or wasn't in contact with her. But then when I came back into working with her directly, and clearly her language had changed, because she had been studying the mystics and felt a deep affinity, especially with Christian mystics, and you know, with Teresa of Avila and Julian of Norwich, and you know, and of course Thomas Merton was a big part of it too. But so for me, that was a whole nother learning phase to kind of come up to speed with it. And I at first I resisted it, because I am not an intellectual. I mean, if you read very much of Beverly's work, I don't think of her as an intellectual in the way I think of a lot of intellectuals, because for me, her intellect is always connected to her heart, and that's something I don't find very much in a lot of spiritual teachings. But because I had a sort of resistance to the intellectual piece, and was not a scholar of in any way, shape, or form. So that was, so I had to. It took me some time to really understand what she was, what she was bringing into the whole constellation that I started out with her. And now it feels very, I don't know, seamless to think in those terms. But at the time, it was, I guess I had kind of an insecurity about that anyway, because like I was the dumb kid in our family, which meant that I occasionally got C's. My brother would get grounded if he got a B, and I could skate by because I was the artist, right? So I had that. But it meant that I was, not very confident when it came to like that kind of study and that kind of use of language. I mean, one of the things about Beverly too is that she uses language in a way that is very creative in my mind. Like, and she uses words that like I've never heard of. Some of them are her words, but she's always so gentle and kind, about bringing you along with understanding what she's, it's never to impress, it's always to try to explain a certain spiritual reality, which is, which I still find to this day just totally miraculous. I read her books like they're sacred texts for me. I can read them, well, I've read most of them many times, but I also will find that I can pick up a book and just open it up and think, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't there before, was it? I mean, because for me it's like I understand it in a different way because I've progressed farther in my ability to take certain things in, and there are certain things that I probably will never understand, but that's okay. I'm done with beating myself up about that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And I'm struck by what you just said about picking up the book for the second or the third time or the fourth time, and that it's very different, because that's happening to me a lot now.
Yeah.
Is something that I read 5 or 6 years ago. Now it's like, wow, it makes sense in a completely different way.
Yeah, and to me that's what Scripture is. It's alive, right?
Yeah.
It's not wedded to one year or one time period.
Yes.
So eventually she started a school?
Yeah, she started the Interfaith Seminary that I went to.
Yeah.
And at the time, I mean, I just have to say that working with Beverly was not, it was never easy. I was like totally poverty stricken when I met her, because I'd been in a bad relationship, and so I babysat her kids to pay for the classes that I was taking, and so at every step along the way, it was like that, like, okay, I have to do this, but every single obstacle was always in my way. It's like, no, I can't afford this. No, I've got 3 kids. No, I can't. It's like all of these things are. When I look at it, it's. I'm a pretty practical person, and it didn't make any practical sense at all. It's like, okay, and my husband is. He was a very good sport, but he's also like one of the most frugal people I've ever met, and but he figured it out really quickly that if Beverly was offering something, it didn't really matter what our finances were like, because I was going to go. So anyway, I'm just saying that because I didn't talk about this part of my spiritual path for a long, long time, because it just I didn't have any words for it, and it didn't really make sense totally to me. So how is it going to make sense to anybody else? Once Beverly started writing books and putting things out like that, it was a little bit easier. And then going through the Interfaith Seminary was really changed everything for me, in the sense that for the first time in my life, it didn't really explain my spiritual life, but I could call myself an interfaith minister, which, was like, I don't know, it was a stepping into for me of, okay, this is what I've been doing all along, and now I can at least say something to people, that, oh, I am a person who is deeply committed to this something that I can't name, but that right now at least I can call myself an interfaith minister, and that's, people don't understand that either, but it was minister,
Yeah.
they could latch onto that word. I mean, when we were going through our program, we were the first class. There were 11 women, and we spent a year discussing what we were going to call ourselves. Like, well, we can't be rabbis because that's too Jewish, and we can't be, priests because, et cetera, et cetera. And we thought, well, let's make up a name, but then that was silly because nobody would have any idea what that was. So we decided that if we could use minister as a verb, that made sense to us. And at least it was something people could recognize. So.
And you use the term reverend.
Kinda. I mean, I was an elementary art teacher for 29 years, and I had this friend that, I didn't tell very many people I was going through this program at the same time I was working, full time. And there was one friend who knew that I was going, and he would walk by my room and say, "Hey, Rev," at the top of this. And I'd be like, oh my God.
He was outing you.
He was, yeah, he was. I had a couple of tests like that. Right after I got ordained, I had been volunteering at the local hospital as a chaplain, volunteer chaplain. And the guy who was in the position, coincidentally, retired right after I got ordained. And so the hospital decided they were going to go with like a group of volunteers. And they asked me if I wanted to be on the group, and I said sure. And so anyway, there were like maybe 12 ministers and priests or whatever sitting around this table. And the lady from the hospital starts out with, well, let's all, everybody introduce yourself and the name of your church. And I'm sitting there going, like kind of freaking out. And anyway, thankfully I wasn't the first person. So by the time they got to me, I just said, my name's Cathy Grigsby. I'm an interfaith minister. I don't have a church. And that was it. And nobody said anything. And then afterwards, though, the priest kind of grabbed me. And he said, "What is this interfaith thing? And what is this?" And so I told him it's a 2-year program, just to make sure he didn't think it was a, $25.
Yeah, out of the back of a magazine.
Right. And I emphasized, we had studies, and we had to write papers and tests and blah, blah, blah. And he listened to me, and then he goes, "Well, who had the power to ordain you?"
Yeah, I've gotten that one too.
Yeah, and so then I went through the whole history of Rabbi Gelberman started the first Interfaith Seminary, and my teacher went to that seminary, and then she started, blah, blah, blah. But then after I said that, I said, really God ordained me.
Beautiful.
And he had no answer to that. So it was kind of a nice, for me, a way of of well, literally having a seat at the table, but also of, you know, legitimizing, you know, what I've been doing all my life, and not apologizing for it, and not minimizing it, but just standing up and saying, yeah, okay, you may not understand it, but here it is anyway, you know. And anyway, so that's my little story about that.
My answer is interfaith marriage support people whatever they believe or don't believe, because even if you don't believe, you still have a spirit.
It's true. Yeah.
During,
Well, I always. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to, during the evolution of your ministry, becoming interfaith minister, and the spiritual journey that you had been on, that you had also been teaching art, if I understand that correctly, and an artist yourself. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how that fits together. That right in the introduction, I talk about, many ways you lift your spirit, and the next is nature, art, and how your spirituality kind of infuses or expresses itself through both teaching art and creating art.
Well, that's a good question, because I told you before that I was the artist in my family, and
Yeah.
so my parents did support me being an artist, which was pretty great. I went to art school, and then I didn't make any money because, what good is an art degree? Not much good. But so I resisted being a teacher at first, and I did a lot of other things, including I was a journalist at a little town newspaper, which is why I like to be asking the questions. But anyway, that's a little detour. I think that for me, art was always like a stabilizing force through my life. It gave me a way to express myself and be with the need for solitude and silence. Before I knew how much that was like food for me, so that was sort of a constant. But even though it was a constant, it still took me a long time before I actually could call myself an artist. I always thought of, I don't know. I just always thought, well, I wasn't good enough. And my art is not, I don't know. It's like the things that I love to paint, or the things that I love to put together, are not necessarily, quote, spiritual topics, if you know what I mean. But
Yes.
So I didn't think of myself in that way, in that this is, I don't know. It took me until I was in, so after my seminary with Beverly, I think it was maybe 7 or 8 years later, she offered a monastic studies program, which I did, and the end result of that was taking monastic vows. So, but during that study part, we had to come up with a kind of a spiritual practice, a regular spiritual practice, and I decided to make doing art my spiritual practice, which it sounds like, oh yeah, well, duh, you're an artist, but for me that was like a huge revelation of like, oh, you mean I can like prioritize this. I can, and what I did was I set up twice a week times that were specifically for doing art, nothing else, and I mean, it sounds silly, but it was hard to do. And, you know, my husband would come up and say, "What are you doing?" Or he'd say, let's play cards. And I'm like, "No, that's my art night." He's like, "Eh." But, you know, it was, it just sounds so simple. And yet for me, it was this big, huge thing of saying, oh, this is important in my life, and this is who I am, and stop apologizing for it and claim it. So then, you know, and also the idea that that could be a spiritual practice. I just
Yes.
didn't, you know, I had these very prescribed things. Okay, spiritual practice, you meditate, you do yoga, you know, there's certain things that I thought that's what that meant. So to expand it into what I love to do and what I've been doing all my life was like, oh, well, I can't claim that as, you know, like that's just like always been there, so that can't be it. But so anyway, has become, you know, a very big part of my spiritual life. But it took me a long time to get there, even though it's looked like I should have been there all along, you know.
You were there all along.
Yeah, I guess.
And how do you bring that to the Chaplaincy Institute of Maine students?
Which you know very well, but I'll don't. So I started out just teaching there at the beginning, because I had met Joel and Jacob, and well, anyway, there were a small group of us who were meeting regularly, and so anyway, I wanted to teach at Chime, and I'd call up Jacob and I'd say, "Jacob, I want to teach," and he'd say, "Okay, what do you want to teach?" And you know, they were kind of loose in those days, and then at some point they said, I don't know how early on it was, Joel, I don't know, maybe you know, but at some point they were like, "Oh, we want you to do some art with the students," and so I started doing sort of big group art things at the retreats, and so that's what I do now. Have done for many years. It's been great. It's been another spiritual practice, really.
And as Ted was referencing in our introduction, we point that out as a path. And you're
Yeah.
speaking beautifully to that and introducing it to the students, that it's another way to bring your spirituality to life.
Yeah, and you know, that aspect of Chime is one of the things I love about it, because the program that I went through with Beverly didn't really have that aspect, just because, for no reason, just that's wasn't the focus. But anyway, there are a lot of students that go through Chime and think that they not only think they aren't artists, but they have this really negative connotation about art. So they're like very scared of doing anything. And a lot of them will come out and say, you know, I now do artwork because of what I got from Chime. So that's always pretty gratifying for me.
And since we're talking about Chime, I just want to mention it's based in Portland, Maine. It's a 2-year program, 1 night a week and 1 weekend a month, with volunteer work, so many hours the first year, and internship the second year. That's what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about. It's a great program, and they are going strong.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about interfaith ministry, call up Chime. Put in a little plug for Chime.
Yeah. So you're on this journey. You find Virginia, and you do her program. You get her ordained.
Beverly.
Beverly. Yeah. So anything be it next steps after that, or is that the step you're in now?
Yeah, well, and then, so I told you that I did the monastic studies program, and at the end of the program, we all took vows. And at that point, Beverly said, well, you guys are already a community, because most of us had been following around for 40 years. So, let's just start a community. So we started the community of a new monastic way, which is basically people who are obviously not living in the same place and not sharing daily rituals or anything, but we have a community, and we've been sharing that community since 2008. So we have one retreat a year in the summer that we all come to, which has been at St. John's University the last, I don't know, probably 10 years.
St. John's in New York or St. John's in New Mexico?
In Minnesota.
Minnesota, another
Neither.
St. John. Okay.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So we meet there once a year for a week of retreat, and then we used to also have regional retreats in the mid-year, but people are all over the place in Seattle and Colorado and on the East Coast. Anyway, so. But we got older, so now we have a yearly Zoom retreat in the middle of the year. And then we meet monthly for a Zoom prayer and discussion group. Yeah, so that's my core community.
It's, I think, would be helpful to talk a little bit about new monasticism and the different forms that it can take, and kind of what it means to the people who are practicing it. There's a new monastic as a residential out in New Mexico, which you're probably aware of. I'm not clear about, for one thing, sort of how large the movement is and what the different manifestations are. I mean, that you're talking about your particular group, but I'm getting the sense there are lots of different communities scattered around, and is there anything that's binding them together, or sort of what are the sort of general principles that you see in defining what new monasticism is?
That's a really good question, and I maybe only have a little piece of an answer, because I'm aware that there are other communities, and there's a book by Adam Bucko and
Adam Becko, yes. Yeah. He's big in that.
Do you remember the other guy's name? Anyway.
Rory McAtee, maybe? Or
Yeah,
okay.
Rory, yeah. Anyway, that book is on new monasticism, and they have a community, but I'm not. And Beverly knows them, and she's in touch with them, so she's probably a better person to answer that, because I'm not really sure how active their community is, and so I don't know the answer to that, but I do know the idea behind new monasticism is that there's like an archetype of the monastic person, and even if there were no religions anywhere, there would be people who are monastics basically in their soul, and so the idea of new monasticism is basically, we're not in a cloister, we're in the world. There's no prescription that you have to be celibate or any of that kind of thing. And I think for the most part, new monasticism is more interfaith, although I think there are some maybe traditional religious communities that consider themselves new monastics. I don't know, though, because I just don't know. So, but the principles are the same. The principles are the commitment to contemplation and to silence and to study of, of contemplation, and so that's why Thomas Merton is always quoted a lot, because he is sort of, I think, the father of modern contemplative thought. He was way ahead of his time, and it's very, I don't know. I find him, even though he has a lot of the Christian language and everything, I find his writings to be very helpful, and I can relate to them because of the contemplative aspect, and the commitment to silence and the commitment to being. I mean, he was in a monastery, but he was also a person who was very in touch with the world, and in fact got in lots of trouble because of that. Because of some of his writings, and if he had lived longer, he would have been interfaith, I have no doubt, because he was already writing about his experience with, like, Buddhism particularly.
Yes.
Anyway.
And your uncle fits that same.
Right, Thomas Keating.
Yeah.
And it is a very different model. I mean, the monasticism in the Christian tradition is like you become a monk, you stay a monk for the rest of your life, and that you have to, if you leave, you're kind of jumping ship, which is different from what I understand in Southeast Asia, where people sort of become monks for 3 or 4 years, but it's not the same type of lifelong commitment, although it's very rigid in terms of the rules and the celibacy, and you're not, whereas in the interfaith community that on the ground out in New Mexico, I don't know a lot about it, but my understanding is the way it's set up is it welcomes families to be living in this, and that
Right.
People have jobs and stuff like that, but they have a physical space that is shared, living space, shared. So it's a very much of a departure from the rigidity of
Right.
the traditional Christian monasteries.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I used to want to be a nun. Which,
Okay, yes, that's an important part of the picture.
I wasn't Catholic, so that was kind of like, well, But I was very drawn to that even as a kid, like the prayer and all of that. So
You found your way.
I found my way. They would never
absolutely.
take me as a. Anyway, yeah, they would have kicked me out for sure. But yeah, I guess part of it too is the idea that holiness is everywhere, and
Yes,
that there's not that there's no need for being cloistered, because I think at different times and for different people they need that,
yes,
but that what the monasteries have built over the years, which I think is pretty remarkable, really, that in Christianity and Buddhism especially, people have been given this gift of turning their lives over to God, and and praying for the world, right? So that's I find that remarkable, and we all know that at this point the monasteries are disappearing, and all of the monks and the nuns are 90 years old, and people are not willing to make that kind of commitment. But it doesn't mean that the idea of the monastic has died. In fact, it's alive and well, I believe. And the idea is, okay, let's take that and integrate it into, how else are we going to have a more sane world if we can't sort of model this deep way of contemplation that can inform our decisions and can inform our institutions and our governments and all of it, So I think that's probably that's part of the idea, is that bring the monastery into the world, and hopefully the world will become more like the monastery in terms of a deep, thoughtful, kind way of being, right?
Beautiful.
Yes.
So we're getting close to our end time. If you'd like to say a few things about Interfaith Ministry of New England, and then we'll wrap up with your suggestion to people to lift their spirits.
Yeah, I guess so. One of the things I didn't say back when I was talking about my childhood is that even though I was in this group of sort of privileged people, it was my introduction to community. And I look at it now, my first introduction, because we were like at each other's houses all the time and doing things all together, which I did not experience in Bluffton, Indiana at all. We had our families, and other people had their, and there was something about that community that felt like I belonged. And so that was also a motivating force for me, because I think community is what is sorely missing in our country. I feel like we had it 200 years ago, kind of, because we had to. But as soon as people were able to get their little houses in a row or whatever, everybody sort of splintered off into family units or whatever. So I feel like a lot of my ministry has to do with that, with community. Through Chime, I'm a part of a co-op art gallery in my town. I helped start a sailing club. Anyway, just lots of different things in my life. So when I was ordained in 1999, I was bereft. I was like, where are my people? My people were all over the country, and no Zoom back then. So and then I found Joel and Patricia, and anyway, that was great. And then Chime happened, and that was great. But I still wanted more community, and so after Chime, I don't know, was around for 5 or 7 years, I don't know. Anyway, one of the recent graduates, we were at another conference, and she was like, "Well, I got really close to all these people, and it was so great, and now, boom, there's nothing. Where are my people?" So anyway, we got a bunch of us together and decided to start the Interfaith Ministry of New England, mainly to just keep that connection going. So we meet twice a year. We have a retreat in the spring, and we have a one-day event in the fall. And up until recently, our main thrust was just community, just connection with one another, supporting one another. We've now sort of branched out a little bit into the social justice arena. And so anyway, that's just another one of my communities, and I think we have to go now, right?
Yeah, we just got the sign. So, any final words you'd like to give
Final words.
to our
Lifting our
viewers today?
spirits.
Yes.
What I'm supposed to talk about. Well, for me, I think there are millions of ways to lift our spirits, and for me, it's always nature is always for sure for me, and art is always for sure for me, and just connecting like we're doing now. It's, you know, there's so much beauty in this world, and so many miracles every day that you know, I just find that celebrating those miracles and celebrating the joy that we've been given is my kind of mantra, really.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cathy, for sharing with us today. And thank you, viewers and listeners, for being with us, and hope you'll join us again next month.